All my compliments to Nora Schmidt. So I am not going to, I'm going to sign off in 1 second, but let me just say again, I'm Eileen Matola from Haverford Township Parks and Recreation. We have a lot of good offerings, and always feel free to call us or email us or the EAC if you have any questions about anything, or if you have an interest in something that we aren't doing or that they aren't doing. And Joy, I don't know if you want to say something for a second about the EAC. And Joy, I am also going to make you the host. So at that point, you can just then turn it on to Nora.
So the Haverford Township Environmental Advisory Committee, we usually call it the EAC. We meet once a month on Wednesday evenings from the first Wednesday of the month from 7:30 to 9:30 in the township building, the meeting room to the left of the commissioner's room. We also meet, it's a hybrid meeting. We also meet virtually. If you're interested in getting the link, you can email haveswitch@gmail.com, or you can just show up.
Okay, great. So without anything else, more ado, or whatever you say, Nora, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Eileen and Joy. I'm actually going, my name is Nora Schmidt again. I'm a water resources engineer at a local firm called AKRF, and we actually do a lot of stormwater projects. And so we've had some permeable paving projects come through us. And so I've also brought in my coworker, Sandy Patunki, who has a lot more experience like with what it looks like afterwards and some maintenance issues and things like that on more of a large scale application, but has much experience that is applicable to a resident as well. So this is just, all right, so here's like kind of what we're going to go through this evening. We're just going to talk about like why we are interested, why we would want to know more about porous paving and why we think it's relevant. And then kind of like what it is and how it's designed, how it's then constructed, some design resources, maintenance cost, and some local contractors, because sometimes those are hard to find who know what they're doing. So, all right. So this is a handy dandy graphic that the Philadelphia Water Department put together. And I think it pretty much really sums up like why we need to be concerned about stormwater and like what's running off your property and why we care. So like in your natural environment here, you have, 40% is evaporation, only 10% is running off into your local waterway. And then, the other 50% is going into the ground versus like in our built environment, in our like residential neighborhoods, in our cities, it's just going to be some sort of portion where over half is running off into your waterway. So permeable paving is one of those options that tries to reduce the amount of runoff and promote infiltration into your landscapes on your property. Also, I'll go through this stuff, but if you have like a pressing question, feel free to like jump in. Otherwise, I can answer questions at the end. All right, so you all know what a typical driveway is solid paving. This is kind of an alternative way. This is not a porous driveway. It is just a means of reducing pavement so that you have less runoff. So you have infiltration that will occur in the green spaces in the grass, but it won't occur in this paving. Also, do I need to back up and I can talk about what infiltration is, just to like kind of back up a little second about permeable paving, because so infiltration is anything that lands on a porous surface. So like anything that's has plants, has dirt, things like that. Pavement has very little infiltration. Like there's like dips and bumps in the pavement, so a little bit will get stored, but it won't infiltrate into the ground. The deeper the root system, the more infiltration, because it can follow the root structure down further. So if we just reduce paving and just turn it to turf grass, that's one step in the right direction. All right, so then we can also do, like, instead of your traditional sidewalk or path, concrete pad, you can do stepping stones like this. So these two alternatives, I think, are pretty, like a step in the right direction of what you can do to, like, get rid of some of the pavement on your property. And it's not, you don't need to do too much thinking. You can just ask your contractor. It'll be like, all right, I want 2 strips, they're roughly like 2 feet wide, and they'll be able to put that in. All right, so now we go, what is actual permeable paving? And permeable paving is where you have either, like, this top layer is going to be what you're seeing on the ground, and that's going to, this will itself will be, water will be able to go through this, or if the brick will not be porous, but the in between, you'll have spacing in between with stone, and that will be porous, so it'll infiltrate through these different layers to get to your subgrade into the shallow infiltration setting. So this is a typical permeable paver setup. You can have other permeable pavements that are solid, but they all look roughly the same. They'll have a stone bedding underneath and some sort of edge restraint just to keep it all together. All right. Okay, so then here are generically your 3 Ps, your paver, your permeable paver, which is probably the more applicable stance for a homeowner to do, is put a paver in. You have permeable concrete, and then you have permeable asphalt. Both of these, permeable concrete and permeable asphalt, we're not going to talk about tonight because they are just, they're basically like infeasible for small projects, because just the amount of material you need to acquire to make this cost effective is inhibitive for small projects. So, all right, so then, yes, so then this is good comment is, like, you can, some driveways you've seen that look like this that aren't permeable, because they'll have, like, literally mortar or concrete in between these gaps, and that makes them impervious. So it's the same as a typical asphalt driveway. So what makes it permeable is when you put the stone or sand in between. All right. So now we get into, this is what we're promoting as one of the more, what homeowners can add to their property is these pavers. So they'll come in like bricks. They come in all different shapes and sizes and colors, but they'll typically have something like a little block that sticks out that kind of sets it up to have the difference between the 2 blocks. So it gives it space on its own. And then this bottom picture did kind of a combination of that, the easy to do pavement. So this is a standard concrete pad with the 2 wheels, but then the patio is actually porous with the sand paving. And it doesn't have to be sand. You can actually put grass. You can make this, put grass in between the blocks, and yeah, it's kind of interesting. All right. So then there are these other options that are not, pavers. And I'm going to let Sandy talk about these because she has a lot of experience and understanding of how these work. Sandy, you want to jump in? If she's there. All right. Well, Sandy can jump in it when she gets back. I think she must have stepped away. But
sorry.
That's all right. Thanks,
Yeah,
Sandy.
no, I was I think I was muted. As Nora mentioned, there's a variety of permeable pavement options. And again, I think the word permeable is, I guess, a operative word in the sense that anything that lets water infiltrate. So, in addition to the options that Nora provided, which are all, based on like cementitious materials, basically they're just sand and mortar, right? So like bricks are made of sand and mortar. Obviously concrete is made of sand and mortar, and asphalt, has stone and then, petroleum byproducts that bind it. Well, these materials, these polymer binders are slightly different in the sense that they're basically like glue, and they just glue stone together to either be this porous pave or this gravel lock material. And again, you can use and basically it's a binder material really, and these things can be used with a variety of aggregates, like the typical rough kind of, we call them 2B, but the more angular like stone that you see in driveways. And you can also even use them with like sort of more decorative and rounded stones. And I've even seen like people put things like decorative glass if they want to do something like some decorative mulch for like a tree. So yeah, so that being said, this is yet another option to use. And I don't know, Nora, if you want to get into, the pros and cons, or where applications are I guess sort of like the best fit in terms of, your site selection and where these things really work best.
Yeah, I think we should definitely get into those. If you have comments on these are products I don't necessarily know too much about. So if you know where these are work best, that would be.
Yeah. I think that, for these applications, if you want to have, I guess really, some of this is really driven by aesthetics. So for example, like if you have, a very naturalized setting, like for example, if you had a garden path or something and you wanted something to look really natural and you just wanted things to look like, it's just a gravel path that has the benefit of, not washing away every time it rains and your gravel getting all over your, your planted beds. I think this is an option to go. I think that being said, I think these materials do require a little bit of expertise. I think when you're laying it down, again, it's just it's basically a glue material. So so from that perspective, I think it does require a little bit of testing to see like what works. And probably I would recommend at least getting a contractor on board if you're planning to use either of these these porous paver, this gravel log, which are, again, like these are 2 proprietary products. So I think there are other stuff out there as well that will work.
Yeah, I think we can probably get into some of the pros and cons of all of them in a little bit. I just want to grab the one. This is the one other option that is more accessible for homeowners, is this kind of a plastic paver, which is, in our world called a geogrid. Geogrids can be used for like slope stability, pathways, walls. Like there's so many different uses for these, but then there are these widely available in different shapes. This is a hexagon, this is a circle, different kind of versions of these where you put plastic kind of grid formations that interlock. They're pretty easy to lay down. You just like grade out your surface and lay these down, and then you just put stone on top of it. And they're all rated for different kind of weight loads. So you can have ones that you have cars on or just pathways. And these, the basic function of these is that, all right, so this is an open bottom grid for the most part, and you put the stone in, and then the grid holds the stone there and allows the water to infiltrate through the grid. So it's kind of a more, and you could probably even use the like gravel lock material, like the glue in here as well, but it's not necessary. All right, so this is what we were kind of getting into, like thinking about where you want to put permeable paving and what type of permeable paving if you're thinking about it. So like, you know, the first and foremost is like, what do you want to use it for? Like, do you want to park your car on it? Do you want to just have it be a sidewalk? Is it a patio? That kind of thing. And then is it going to continue to be those things? If you think, you know, like maybe I won't be using that as a sidewalk, maybe then you can get rid of the sidewalk completely. And also you do need to definitely know like how much weight you're going to put on it. Are you going to be parking your car or are you just going to walk on it? Because that will, as you saw kind of, you can't use those proprietary glue type porous paving. And then a big one is, you know, kind of knowing how much water is going to get to your driveway. Because if you have a creek running through your driveway, it's probably not going to be great for a porous asphalt or porous driveway either. For the most part, it can handle a decent amount of runoff, but you wouldn't also want it to have, if you're running off from your garden and it's full of mulch or full of sand from, you know, a sandbox or something like that, you don't want that, because you don't want to have that sand and the mulch and all that stuff running off, basically clogging up the pores of your porous pavement. And we'll get to the maintenance later on, but there are ways you can mitigate, clean your porous pavement after the fact. But if you can avoid placing it in those locations to begin with, that's preferred. And then, so as you saw in a few slides ago with that cross section with this stone and then all the way down to the sub base where you're promoting infiltration, the higher your infiltration rate, like the more pore space that's available for your water, for the water to go through, the higher infiltration rate is. So like the more water you can infiltrate through your porous pavement. So not to say you can't have porous pavement if you have low infiltrating soil or poor soil. It just kind of changes how you think about it. Like maybe you don't want to have a lot of run on if you have poor soil. You could just treat just your driveway. And this is just a generic rule of thumb. Most homeowners probably won't necessarily know the depth of your water table, but we usually try to avoid putting porous or infiltrating anything within 2 feet of your water table. But I think mostly in Havertown in the Delco area, I think where most of your houses are like slightly elevated most of the time. So this shouldn't be an issue. And also slope of your driveway. If you have a very steep slope, that's also not like if you have a big hill and your driveway sloping down a lot, like it's not super ideal, but it's still better than a typical asphalt driveway, because the larger the slope, the less time basically that your water can infiltrate. It's going to go the path of least resistance. It's going to slide right back down into your gutter, into the street, instead of infiltrating if you have like a very high slope. All right, we talked about the sediment loading, and then just knowing if you're putting new pavement down, you would do a PA1 call just to make sure you're not like hitting any utilities. All right, so Sandy, I didn't give you an intro, but Sandy works with me at AKRF, and she does construction and she's a landscape architect. So this is like her kind of forte. So maybe if you want to talk about some of these construction issues.
Sure. I think in the examples or in the photos that Nora's presented here, probably, the most applicable thing are probably the everything, I guess, except for the bottom right one. in the sense that, you know, in sort of more, I guess, intensive, like municipal and I guess just bigger stormwater management that we do at AKRF, you know, oftentimes we'll combine different stormwater capture systems that are, you know, stacked on top of one another or like one in parallel on top of another. So what you're seeing on that right bottom corner there is just like a fairly deep system that we actually put in an alleyway where, you know, there's multiple cells beneath the actual porous pavement itself that, you know, detain water and then slowly releases it over time. So, you know, for most homeowners, like something like what you're seeing on that bottom right-hand corner is, you know, probably not as applicable because again, it's, you know, that's really for a much more intensive, you know, stormwater capture that we're doing. So that being said, you know, with porous asphalt or actually porous asphalt concrete and pavers, the thing that you really have to be mindful about is that you really want to make sure that you preserve the integrity of the porousness, right? So you don't want anything that's going to compromise it, like having you know, construction materials or dirt or soil or any kind of material that are going to, you know, either clog your little the joints in your pavers that really lets your water percolate to the soil below. So that being said, you know, you really want to make sure that when you're building your you know, your porous pavement feature, you know, whatever that may be, either a driveway or a patio or anything, you really want to make sure that you're not having like material running onto the site. So, you know, making sure that if you're going to have a soil stockpile area for any of the excavation that you're doing, you're keeping that downstream of your pavement. So I think, you know, that's probably first and foremost during construction. That's probably the most important thing. You know, in terms of making sure that you're preserving the integrity of your pavers. You also want to make sure that, you know, your sub-base preparation is you know, according to spec. And again, I think as far as specifications are concerned, obviously like any good contractor is going to know like how to prepare your base soil after you excavate everything to make sure that you're not like overly compacting it or you're or you know, or it's not too mushy and you have like soft spots. So you know, there's you know, vendors will have really good guidance as far as like how to prepare you know, not only the surface, like the swell surface, the excavated surface where your pavers are going to go in. And again, you want to make sure that it's not, you know, wet, it's not, you know, you don't have like uneven spots, and it's essentially that it's, you know, prepared to be even and or you know, to be graded in the sense that it needs to be graded. And then there's just and then there's no like you know, drainage issue with the swell itself. So so sort of like those are the two big things. But beyond that, you know, as far as like porous pavers are concerned, your installation is pretty typical to how regular pavers get installed. Usually there's sort of some sort of edge restraint that keeps the pavers in place. And you know, the restraint can be, you know, a variety of different materials. They could be, you know, a concrete edging. It could be you know, a metal strip. I probably wouldn't recommend like some of the plastic edging just because I think over time they can shift a little bit. But you know, that being said, you know, they can be used. And you know, just making sure that, you know, the edge is stable and it's, you know, installed securely. And there's also specifications as far as like, sort of the tolerances that you will want for your actual paver surface, which is that you don't want to have a deflection of less than like 1/8 of an inch over 10 feet. Again, that's just standard practice for like any good paver installation, so that you don't have, bird bats or sort of like low spots in any one place. Beyond that, I think, with these pavers, the joint material is a different gradation of sand that's, that's selected so that they don't pack tightly. You want to make sure that the joint material is designed for, this application. And you want to make sure that, when they're installing it, it's, swept in properly. And you probably will have to, and the contractor will probably have to come back in and probably after a couple of months where things have settled a little bit and maybe like top things off. So I think really those are the main 3 points, is that, keep anything that's going to clog the pavers off to the side. Make sure that your contractor is following specifications, per the manufacturer, or whatever guidance you're using. And then making sure that after everything's installed, that the contractor come back in and check it and fix any defects. And again, we can really certainly go into any good and actually any good landscape architect or any really designer will have like fairly strict specifications as far as how how things need to be installed. And so this is where probably getting the guidance of a professional when you're really doing this to get their input, I think is really valuable, because again, you don't want to invest in a $30,000 driveway that has like a one spot where everything just sort of is just holding water. So
All right. All right, so we Sandy kind of got into a bunch of like design related like topics, like you said, if you have a contractor, there are a bunch of contractors that have done porous paving and pervious pavers, and they will know how to do it. But if you like decide you want to go your way and design it yourself, there's this design guidance is like for homeowners. I can share the PDF, but this design guidance from Montgomery County, Maryland is really, really good for like homeowners, like driveway type things. All right, so Sandy touched on how much, like if you could be spending $30,000 potentially on a driveway. So I thought here's the generic cost. So like for a porous paver, porous, paver driveway, you're going to spend $30 to $50 per square foot, compared to, less than half of that, 4 to 15 per square foot for your standard concrete driveway. So yeah, it is much, it's double, almost more than that cost. So it is something to be aware of, but you can go the way of doing like just the strips of paving, just doing some sidewalk, just doing whatever, if you were going to do a typical paver driveway without the porous, like it's going to be in the realm of that cost as well. And you are retaining stormwater on your property, reducing flooding and downstream. So there's I think some of the benefits outweigh the increase in cost. All right, so we're touching on this maintenance aspect. So just preventative, what you want to do, like when you're in construction, avoid, place all your debris down slope of the project. But once you have installed it, you're going to need to remove it. Don't don't dump a truckload of sand on top of it, a truckload of anything on top of it. If you can, so remove it and sweep it. Yes, and then, after a rain event, just kind of like look out, see how it's doing. If it's ponding in a weird spot, like maybe there's something clogging it and you can just like brush it off. And then, yeah, just don't store anything, don't put anything loose nearby. Like if you could have a strip of grass and then your mulched garden bed, that's preferable. All right. So then winter maintenance. So our winters are getting a little less icy and snowy, but when snow does accumulate, since it is more I guess what we've said, like sometimes porous paving might actually, help with ice a little bit, but it won't like ice over faster. It's not going to be really that much different than your typical pavement. And if you have somebody scrape your driveway, you want to have like a rubber edge or a hand shovel. You don't want to like be pushing things around and messing up the porous nature. Also, don't use salt. They can damage the actual chemical qualities, I think. And just use sparingly and just don't use if you can avoid it. And then, like Sandy said, the contractor might have to come out a few weeks later, maybe, a year later, you might yourself have to add some sand or small stones in between the joints just because things do move around. So that's okay. All right, so there are a bunch of local contractors. These were a few just specific ones in the Havertown, Delco area, but the Philadelphia Water Department has a list of contractors and that do porous pavement, and it tells you in this list exactly what they do. And these are all people that have worked with the water department in their local residential program. So these specific contractors and they're all over, the area, some over in Delaware County. So I would start in this list first, just because they have, they're vetted by another county, another city. All right. And then, yeah, so this is my email. This is Sandy's email. If you have questions, but we'll take questions now, I guess, too. I think there were some questions in the chat too. All right. So we said the range of depth of the subsurface materials needed. Yeah, Peter responded. It says, so for all of your porous surfaces, we'd want at least 6 inches of bedding, which is typical of actually your standard concrete and asphalt. You want something underneath there to just bed your material in. And then if you can have more stone, then you have more, basically the stone has a void in between each of the particles. And so the more void space you can add by deepening the stone storage, the more you're going to store when you're infiltrating. And all right, so then porous, Joy asked, are porous pavers something that is available in big box stores or rock or stone dealers? I know you can get the GeoGrid, the plastic grid systems. Those are widely available in box stores. I'm not too sure about, you can buy pavers at like a Home Depot and then just not mortar them in between. Sandy, do you have any?
Yeah, no. The pavers are specifically manufactured to have little they're like little fins on the side so that they're always kept at a certain, distance from one another. And that's really so they are manufactured to, specific tolerances. So that being said, like any good you probably won't be able to go to like a big box store, but probably like you can probably go to any store that or any vendor that sells just hardware materials, you know, especially like paving materials. I'm trying to think of, you know, for example, like near my house, which is sort of like in Montgomery County, Allied Landscape Supply is one place that would probably carry something like that. And certainly, like you can also, you know, if you there's a couple of big manufacturers that make them, like Belgard makes them. There's like paved stones, and again, I think we can certainly share that information with you. So I think, you know, if you go to any of their websites, they will usually have a locator that sells these products. So I think, you know, I think they can be, they're not they're not impossible to, you know, get a hold of.
And if you are working with a contractor, they will be able to source you source them for you, and whatever you want them to look like, they can find them. And yeah, I can share this PowerPoint, which has the links embedded in afterwards. Right, Joe, do you have a list of everyone? Or I guess Eileen does at least.
Eileen, yes, so she'll be able to, if you share it with me or Eileen, then when she sends out the information about the recording, she'll also send out the slides.
Okay. Are there any other questions? We can explain more things, answer questions.
I have a question about, like, and I'm sure this depends on the product, but how much better is having these materials down versus just grass if it's not sloped?
Right. That's a good question. I think, well, grass, so like if we get back to like how deep is your storage, kind of, if you think about it that way, and how much void space, how much area is there for water to go. Grass and soil have very little, you know, the typical grass is like the root zone is what, like 1 to 3 inches type thing. So you're only getting pretty, you know, and that's what's disrupting the clay. I think Sadie, you could speak to this because you know.
Yeah, I think, so I think it really depends on what your application is. You know, if, obviously, if you want to have a paved area, again, you know, paved being the operative word here, these materials are much better than, you know, doing something that is not porous, like just, you know, regular asphalt or regular concrete. So if you want, you know, a driveway, obviously you wouldn't necessarily want to keep a driveway as grass, right? So if you put a paved driveway, then, you know, going the route of doing the porous is better than going standard. But that being said, you know, if being all things equal, really, like the best thing is, you know, obviously not to, if you don't need to disturb the soil and you just, you know, it's just things are just vegetated, even if it's grass, it's literally like, you know, that's, the grass will be more permeable than, you know, either of these things. So, or like the porous pavement options. So really, so the question is, you know, is it better? The question is, it's better if it's a better product if your intention is to have an area that's paved. But if it's not paved, then just keep it as, you know, vegetated, like as grass or just other plantings.
I was just thinking for a driveway, if somebody was considering doing these pavers, these porous pavers versus like the 2 strips.
I see.
I mean, I would think the cost of the 2 strips would be far less than
Correct.
the porous pavers.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. And again, you know, back to basics, right? I mean, if somebody just wanted something to be porous, they could just have a gravel driveway. I mean, that's, you know, that's sort of like the gravel driveway is sort of like the mother of all like paved, you know, sort of semi-paved option and porous. But that's correct. I think if you're looking at you know, just sort of those concrete strips, I think that the last time I put an estimate together, I think, you know, a pavement, it's probably about $25 per square foot. Like, yeah, between like, yeah, depending on how much base and everything you have, but you know, I think it's anywhere from like $16 to $24, depending on the thickness of your concrete and your base. So, you know, so in some ways, it's obviously it's sort of like, you know, your square footage, right? Your square footage for those little tire strips is going to be less than like if you were to pave over your whole driveway. So
Yeah, I did want to throw my 2 cents in. This is Peter, about, you know, grass versus porous. So grass, it really depends on, you know, the soil conditions. So
yep.
most grass is highly compacted. And if there's any slope to it, it's really not going to absorb very much water. I actually have porous pave in walking areas past the end of my driveway. And I mean, the water just disappears, even in a heavy rain, you know, because it was constructed with a lot of underlying stone. And so these things actually do perform if they're constructed correctly and maintained. Somebody asked a question in the chat about, oh, I've got a sloped driveway. That's a design challenge. So a sloped driveway is going to run off like crazy, period, right? You know, so the more the more slope, the quicker things run off, whether it's grass or paving or anything. I think for something like this, you can get some benefit out of it, but it's a design challenge because you sort of have to create terraces in order to impound water. If you put in, you know, a foot or 18 inches of gravel over a sloped bottom, the water's going to go through and then it's going to run across the bottom and it's going to come out at the end of the driveway. So but there, you know, you could be a little bit more creative about designing it so that it does actually hold and permeate, you know. But there's, you know, there's other solutions too, like, you know, you can put a trench drain at the end of a driveway and take the water into a rain garden and on the front of your lawn or something like that. So there's a lot of different strategies. But slopiness tends to be more challenging in general.
Yeah, and if you could get away with just the 2 strips of concrete, that might be the easiest, best bet. You can reduce your impervious footprint, but because, you know, some of those, like the gravel geogrids with the gravel that just sits in it, it's gonna, on a slope, a big rainstorm might wash away some of that. So I think, yeah, but like Peter said, there are a lot of different ways that you can kind of daisy chain a few things together. So if you have, you know, you want to, like, if your pavement like flows over and doesn't go directly into the street, but you're flowing from your driveway onto your yard, you can, you know, take the runoff from your driveway and do something in your yard instead of retrofitting your driveway. So you can put in more plantings, you can put in a rain garden, a swale, these trench drains. Some of those things require, you know, some more design effort. Some of them just planting, adding additional roots zones close to your runoff promotes infiltration. Yeah, which is mostly like the whole goal is to reduce the runoff, reduce what's leaving your property. And all the questions in this chat. Oh yeah, thanks for sharing that list, Peter.
Yeah, by the way, so my porous pave experience is I have a corner roof downspout that the water runs off so quickly that it's always been a waterfall over the edge forever and ever. And that sort of exposed one of the weaknesses of porous pave. So there's a big divot right there where that waterfall hits the porous paving. The other lesson learned is porous pave is really difficult for a contractor to do a good job. They really have to be skilled. You definitely don't want it for a vehicle on. I think some of the arboretums I've seen porous pave as walking paths. I think that's the best
Right.
application for it.
Yeah, it's I think it's, again, I think it comes back to aesthetics. It looks really natural, or naturalized, I guess.
And I know someone who installed gravel lock. The advantage for I don't think I would ever recommend a do-it-yourselfer to do porous pave. Gravel lock, you could actually set decorative stone, and this fellow actually did like patterns, and he worked with he had a gardener, and he worked with his gardener, and so he did the whole thing, laid everything in, compacted it, and then you actually pour this polymeric material, you kind of sprinkle it over it, and it sets. And to me, that sounded like a much easier way to do it than what I saw my contractor do, the porous pave, which, they were mixing everything up together in like a little concrete mixer, and then it's like beat the clock to get
Yeah.
it in. And I think they didn't really understand the fact that you can't just screed it like you screed concrete. You really have to kind of work it in enough to get it to to be strong enough, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But so a little more challenging.
I actually have a question for the people who are participating in this discussion. And if you can just put it in the chat, what made you sign on for this webinar? Are you interested in changing your driveway, sidewalk, just walking paths around your house? I'm just curious to see what the need or the interest is of our community. Or if you're just interested.
Well, so while everyone is doing that, I will offer again, other alternatives. Joy herself just got a rain garden that captures her entire driveway. And sometimes you're lucky enough that the water runs naturally without doing, heroic measures like saw cutting the pavement and putting in a trench drain. You could actually get it to run to a location where you could put in a rain garden. So that's always an alternative as well.
And honestly, maybe a little easier if you get it through if you live in Haverford Township, you get your rain garden through that program.
Yeah, so here's the plug. So Peter helps run the Have a Rain Garden programs. For those who don't know, you can email have a rain garden at gmail.com to get your property assessed. They have arranged for grants that funds the program and lots of volunteers. So there's some plantings going on. Peter, maybe you could put the sign up in the chat. So there's more going in this season. And the goal is to get 100 rain gardens in Haverford Township in 10 years.
You're on year 8 or 7? You know?
Yeah, I think this is year 8. And yeah, we've got something like, we're approaching 80 rain gardens now, I think. Jen, I guess, noted that she needs to offset an addition to a house. So that problem, I think everything that you've heard today might be useful to you, but that is one application which you really need a professional. So an engineer needs to design something to offset the impervious area that they will stand behind, and that the township will accept and issue a permit for the addition. So that's a little bit more complicated than a do-it-yourself project, or even what I did with permeable paving, which was just hire a landscaper who knew how to do it, although they didn't have that much experience with it, I think, as it turned out. But you see with like additions and even some new construction, like semi-attached subdivided properties, where a contractor will get a design that actually uses a storage bed under a driveway to detain and infiltrate stormwater. So, I mean, this concept could definitely be used to do that, but I think the burden of proof in terms of getting a permit often means that you have an engineer who's designing it. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, everything that you heard here is hopefully going to be useful to it. I think when it comes to the, when it comes to an addition to a house, that really should be part of the scope of whoever's designing the addition. And if they need to bring on a civil engineer to do that aspect of it, sometimes, they'll put in a rock bed and infiltrate. You see this sometimes with new developments where all the roof drains are actually piped underground, and the underground pipe goes into an underground catchment. And that's designed to hold water and infiltrate it slowly into the ground. So that's another strategy as well. That's used for, new home construction oftentimes.
Unlike the old home construction where the underground pipe goes to the street.
Sometimes to the street, right, which is the opposite of what you'd like to see. So that you just it's an express route to get to the street and into the storm sewer and into the streams, which you really don't want to see.
Right, yeah, I think there were some other, you can incorporate, like you said, drainage underneath your porous paving too, if you want to increase your storage even further than 6 to 18 inches, you could go even deeper than that too.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves on new construction and additions, well, I mean, I have a lot of pet peeves because I'm in the rain garden. I don't want to say business hobby at a crazy level hobby, but so you just see a lot of things that just continually is increasing impervious areas, like people doubling the width of their driveways and putting little drives across their front lawn and stuff like that, which just doesn't help the situation. I think now you can't, by ordinance, you can't put a pipe to the street unless you get like a special exception, but it's more difficult to get that kind of exception. But years ago, they used to pipe things directly to the street, and you still see a lot of that.
So I guess the minimum, if anybody could do, is if you have anything piped to the street, trying to pull that out and run it over your yard is usually the preferred method.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea too, if you have paths to the front door, I just love the look of like a natural stone. And so, a little, you often see this, instead of a concrete walkway to the front door, you'll see a little slate path. And it's a little, some of these things are a little harder to deal with, like, shoveling the slate is difficult, obviously. But I sort of have that situation. I actually have an old 2 concrete runner driveway that the former owner actually excavated, I guess, the dirt in between it, and he laid in old repurposed bricks with sand underneath. So I sort of have a pervious driveway, not like really, it's not going to accept a huge amount of water, but it's so flat that the water just sits in there and it's going to hold an inch of water and percolate it before it starts running out to the street. So.
All right. Anybody have any last thoughts, questions? Don't see any more chats,
So, yeah, I did put the Have a Rain Garden email address. If you live in Haverford and you're interested in a rain garden, just send an email with address, phone number, and we'll get you on the list to get an invitation to be assessed. I also wanted to put in a pitch for the stormwater stream smart assessments. Nora, do you remember who's doing that now? Is it DCVA?
or the Jamie's program.
Yeah.
Um,
If you search for Stream Smart,
Alarming Conservancy, and what is she? The collaborative she works at.
right. And so they'll come to your house and do an assessment and sort of give you some recommendations of things that you can do, whether, but they won't actually like do a rain garden like you can get with Haverford. Although, conditions have to be right in order for you to get a rain garden, but they will do things, recommend things like stormwater planters, rain barrels, give you advice about the suitability of the property for a rain garden. And they should be able to give you advice on things like permeable paving.
And I'd like to plug, I put in the Lower Merion Conservancy Stream Smart website. And right above that, I put in the chat, the haverfordclimateaction.org. So this is a fairly new website that members of the EAC together with the Civic Association has put together. As long as it's okay with Nora, we'll put a link to this talk
Yeah.
and some of the information from the talk. We'll load it onto the website. There's information about the rain gardens there and other things that you can do. You can get reduced cost rain barrels through, I forgot the name of the organization, but all those links are there for other things that you might be interested in doing to both reduce stormwater as well as, which is kind of like a climate adaptation, but there's also climate mitigation strategies on there as well.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. This is fun.
So if you do want Stream Smart and you're in Haverford, I think you're going to have to go to dcva.org. I don't think Lower Merion Conservancy will do it for us. I'll drop that in. Yeah, so that's a link for, if you're in Lower Merion, I think the Lower Merion Conservancy is the place to go. I think in Haverford and most of the Darby Cobbs watershed, it would be DCVA.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and I'll have Eileen send out the copy of the slides and the recording. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nora.